Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for the 8th Residential Estates webinar. This evening, we're going to be talking about the UK lettings market in 2021, where we are, where we've been, where we're going. I'm Jason Guest, Business and Marketing Manager for Residential Estates. I'm joined by, not Katie.
No, I'm not Katie. Sorry to disappoint everyone. That was expected, Katie. And we should have Pete as well. Pete, if you want to join the stage.
Absolutely. Hi, guys. You're right.
Yeah. Hi, Peter. Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Peter Baker, Business Development Manager for UK Rooms for Rent over in Manchester. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Jason. Michael, you good?
Well, yeah, we should all.
Well, yeah.
This evening, we've timed it well with the football for anyone who was watching it.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, great result. Looking forward to the next lineup.
Yeah.
So hopefully, we've got a kind of mix of us, haven't we? Here, obviously, Katie's not joining us, but I can sort of bring the investment side. I head up the investment department for residential estates. You've come with a lot of experience having in the letting side. As well as doing the marketing.
Yeah, 20 years in property, but 15 years in lettings myself. So yeah, a little bit.
And then yourself, Pete, bring vast amounts of experience, particularly in the Manchester area, isn't it, where you got the company there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I've been in the property industry since 2001 across residential sales and lettings, and predominantly concentrate now more on a lot of HMO management. Been in the Manchester market for 14 years. So, I've seen a lot change over that period of time, and hopefully tonight we'll be able to kind of discuss that a little bit more and see kind of where we're up to in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So this evening, basically, we're going to, as we sort of mentioned, we're going to be discussing the lettings market predominantly, overview of the UK, current trends, lifestyle habits. The dreaded word COVID is going to be mentioned more than once.
On every webinar, I think, hasn't it? But it's hard to avoid it.
Very, very hard to avoid. We'll then be heading over to Manchester and putting you all in the capable hands of Peter to tell us what's going on over there. Back with ourselves, we'll chat a little bit more in depth about the Chester market, Cheshire, etc. What we can offer service-wise and agents in general, and then our predictions for the future.
Yeah, we just want to keep it sort of like a debate. We want you to get involved as well if you can. So you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen the chat section. Feel free to comment if anything we've said you agree with or disagree with, or you add your thoughts. You're welcome to do that. Like I say, we try and keep it interactive and as light as possible. And go from there on it. So.
Yeah, ask any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And if we can't actually answer them, we will send you the answers via email after the event. Yeah. So let's move on. So without further ado, let's move on. UK House Price Index. I just wanted to touch on this briefly because we're going to be talking about rental increases and rental figures, but we've seen the same happen with the figures of the sales figures, residential sales. We've got there on the left-hand side. Currently, the UK the average price of the UK property is 250,000.
Yeah, and it's a big jump, in particular this last year, isn't it? 9%. No one was sure when COVID hit of what was going to happen. Even the most optimistic probably couldn't have predicted this bigger growth, but it's great news for us and certainly from an investment side as well. And it shows as well, it's important keeping on there that it's dipped a little bit this month according to that, and that is what property does, doesn't it? It goes up and down, but in general, if you look at the property graph, it goes up in an onwards direction on it. So yeah.
And I think interestingly, if you actually have a look at that sort of trend over the last kind of 12 months, but property prices increasing, but dipping a little bit over the last month since we came out of what would have been like a first bit of, kind of a relief from the lockdown. I think there's a load of people out there who haven't been going on holidays. We've been putting time and attention and funds into actually doing up the houses, so that when it does come to selling, you know what, you can get slightly more out of it. It makes for an interesting set of statistics, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be looking at a few more stats as we go, as we've already discussed earlier. But, obviously, that's the sales side of things. And rentals isn't far behind. The rental lettings market has recovered slightly slower than residential sales. I think we've seen the sales market go up before the rental market. And there's reasons for that. And again, unfortunately, I'm going to come back to COVID quite quickly, and the lettings market's in recovery, but it's starting to come out of that. COVID's still affecting certain demographics, and it's basically down to the uncertainty in the country. You've got a decline in younger adults up until recently moving out of parents' homes, and that's through job uncertainty, things like that. And again, with people not moving out of property, you've then got a lack of available property. I don't know, are you finding the same thing over there in Manchester?
Yeah, I think a lot of people during the pandemic, especially, did put kind of moving out on hold, whether or not it was moving out of the hotel of mum and dad, or moving out from their current living situation and whatever sort of accommodation they were in. It's just remained kind of quite static. But what we are starting to see now is a nice natural shift in movement. People looking to kind of get out of where they are. Interestingly enough, downsizing is a common thing at the moment. So there's a lot of people looking to kind of downsize, but yeah, there's certainly stuff happening. One of the hardest things to kind of still come to terms with in this current market is the fact that the average age of a first-time buyer is 42 years old.
Yeah,
for a first-time buyer, it's still a way off where it used to be. Only 15 years ago, that was at 27. Yeah. So the market has come a long way, definitely.
Yeah. There's been other contributing factors as well, for the lettings market, and the reason people haven't moved yet. We've got the mortgage holiday scheme for landlords, which we had over the lockdown, and the tenant eviction ban as well. Both have had short and long-term effects on tenants leaving their properties or not leaving their properties. And then because of that not leaving, then again, that has an effect on the availability or the lack of availability. However, with vaccines now being rolled out, we're now going to be seeing more movement around the country. Unfortunately, we are seeing job losses and small companies, big small and big companies closing down. So there is job losses there. But where people can't find jobs in one city, now they're able to move, and with that opening up of the country, we are going to see people moving about, and then that will help with the availability, and it all has a knock-on effect. Current trends, COVID's got a lot to answer for in terms of how we live our lives now. One thing that I noticed, April this year, a stat I came across, 28% of working adults worked exclusively from home now.
Well, I mean, we've seen, haven't we? We've worked from home.
And done very well.
COVID, but yeah, we had our record months in the investment side and the letting side even done particularly well. So we've proven you can do that on it. And you don't have to be in an office to work.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, you work from home, don't you, quite a lot of the time?
Yeah, same thing. So this is the spare room, aka the study. It serves me quite well. I think it's certainly a thing where if you kind of sat down and if your employer has said to you last March, without a pandemic, I want you to work from home, the first response would be like, no. And now the employers are like, come back to the office, and the first response is, well, no. I enjoy not having my commute. I enjoy being able to sit in my slippers and a pair of shorts and do my morning meeting with a shirt on. I enjoy being able to make a cup of coffee without making 12. And I enjoy being able to sit here and stroke my cat and my dog and just generally just be at ease. And I kind of think as well, productivity, if we haven't got the external extractions or just somebody walking by and having a chat or phones going in the background that aren't meant for you, then you hone yourself in. And I tend to find that I get more done in a 4-hour period working from home than I would do all day in the office. It's probably the same for you guys as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it makes it even more important where you're actually going to rent, doesn't it? You know, you're not just living in that property now. You're going to be working in there as well, which has a big effect. And we come on to it, don't we, of people wanting outdoor space a bit more than perhaps they used to in the past.
Yeah, it leads us quite nicely on to exercise. You know, we've got some figures there, graphs showing exercise levels during spring last year. It's had a massive effect on lifestyle choices. You know, people wanting larger areas, people wanting gardens. You know, in May 2020, 36% of people said they were spending more time outside. By July of last year, that rose to 46%. You know, I'm a great example of this. I spent the whole of 3 lockdowns in a first floor flat on my own, wishing, certainly last summer, that I had a garden. You know, okay, I can go out to the park and things like that, but, you know, I've got colleagues that were actually working in the garden on their laptops, and you know, I could only dream of that. And it did put in my mind even thoughts of perhaps moving out of the place I was to look for a place with a garden, a small house. So, you know, it certainly changed people's way of thinking, you know, and lifestyle. Yeah, and it's also another thing on this. It's slightly affected people and certain types of accommodation. I know we've discussed this before, Peter, but shared accommodation and shared facilities. You know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think you've got some great stats and examples of this coming up later on in your local market. You know, if you're kind of in a situation where you've been living in shared accommodation, a lot of shared accommodation doesn't really have much of an outside space or garden. So when you get to a case of you get a couple of people who a couple of mates who want to move out, you can go and get a house, you can go and get an affordable house, but it still costs you exactly the same money, but you might have that concrete courtyard outside with a bit of 4G and an outhouse in, and that is your world. You know, that is something that's better than nothing, and a lot of people are moving out. And, you know, we've seen a massive increase in the speed at which single-let properties are rented out. HMOs still renting, but single-let properties are going pretty much the day after they're listed. So, it's good signs. It's good signs.
It is. One thing we mentioned on shared facilities, though, and I know certain HMOs and certain properties in the student sector where there's pods and shared bathrooms and kitchens, COVID's had a negative effect on that, hasn't it? But I know, Peter, that you mentioned there was a kind of a fix that I'd not really heard of, not dealing with HMOs myself, but where, you know, if you've got separate bathrooms, that you can put locks on them and actually assign them to bedrooms.
Yeah, of course. It's something that's quite good. Obviously, it doesn't work with every single property that you're dealing with, but I think a lot of the time, landlords, whenever they do a property such as HMO, like to have a nice mix. So they'll, at the refurb stage, go down the route of getting the ensuite rooms. So you can have a 4-bedroom house with 3 ensuite rooms and 1 main bathroom. Well, turn that bathroom into an off-suite. So it'll only cost you the price of a lock change. It's not going to cost you any more than that. You'll be able to rent the room with basically the off suite and charge the increased rent rate as well. So it's working wonderfully. It's something that we brought into play about 6 months ago, and it's catching on really well. So but that's just one little way, though, that we encourage landlords to kind of look at different options with their housing in order to kind of get the best out of the investment opportunity.
Yeah, and we've seen it on the student side, haven't we, in particular investment properties that we've sold. Those where the studio self-contained apartments have been much more popular than what you mentioned before, the clusters as we call it, where there's maybe 3 or 4 ensuite bedrooms with 1 shared kitchen. I'm guessing it's probably COVID that's had that effect on it and put people off it. So they've done well on that front, not only from the rental side, but from people buying into it as well. They get that. I think that's here to stay. I think.
I think you're right. People just wary of having shared facilities. They want their own space.
But see, there'll always be a market for it, though. And this is the interesting thing. There will always be a market for that particular type of accommodation, especially when you start having a look at things such as cost of living. And the fact that the house prices are increasing 8.9% per annum as they are, that puts the options of a first-time buyer getting on the market slightly further and further out of reach. Turns them more towards the lower price rental accommodation, which is the favourable HMO and shared accommodation. So it's an industry in one way or another that will benefit from every single avenue. It's just a case of being in the same stream or avenue where it's going to work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just, we've actually covered what I was going to discuss about other reasons why, rents are starting to increase as we see restrictions ease anyway. But it's all done. And you mentioned to this, Peter, about downsizing. Unfortunately, due to job loss or income loss, people needing to go down or whatever, but where we see an increase in unemployment, it also brings an increase in demand. And while demand is high, that's when we see rents increase as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely. There's various, there's loads of different factors that come into the rental market situation when you're actually looking at what will spike or cause an increase in properties or a kind of demand or lack of demand or an oversupply. And it can be anything from prices increasing to job losses, quite commonly at the moment. This is something that I know a couple of individuals concerned by this, but relationships break up. We're not designed as human beings to spend 18 months solidly with the same person day in and day out without there being some sort of friction or some sort of problems. And there's a lot of people breaking up as well. So I think there's, I think we're in a new element of the property market where we've actually got more things to consider than just the straightforward requirements and demands of an investor. We've got a whole personal dynamic to bring on board as well, and just got to remain flexible and be understanding of it.
Yeah, and I think flexible is the key. And Capital's just asked the question, hi Capital, about building an investment portfolio of 4 or 5 properties, and he asked, what would you advise? I would advise Capital a good mixture, because like we just pointed out, there can be certain trends, can't there, where certain sectors do well, the other possibly doesn't. If you've got a good blend of it, you're in a good position there. So all those ones you mentioned, standard buy-to-lets, FHLs, which we're really positive on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, think of it like a bag of all sorts. You've got to have little bits of everything in there, haven't you?
Yeah, it covers you for any eventuality. One might not do, one might decline, but where one declines, another one does better. Another reason for rent increases, the tenant fee ban. So the tenant fee ban came into effect on the 1st of June 2019, and this inadvertently resulted in an increase to rents. How did it do that? So the Act banned letting agents, quite rightly, I suppose we've discussed this, we'll get onto it in a minute, but it banned letting agents from charging potential tenants fees, which many agents overinflated against the actual cost to form additional income. For many agents around the UK, that was actually quite a big income as well. You'll now often see agents requesting a holding payment, which is completely legal. The payment is capped at 7 days rent value, forms part of the first month's rent payment when the tenancy commences. Commercially, no letting agent will be able to cover the costs of references, meaning the associated fees were initially passed on to landlords. Landlords, obviously, with increase in fees, then come back to sort of deciding let's put the rents up in a way. Just to finish on this before we get on to discussing it, the average referencing cost of landlords in the UK is £120 plus VAT, which is still overinflated against the actual cost. A fair rental increase to the end user, i.e. the tenant, should be in the region of £10 to £20. Sadly, though, this simply isn't the case.
It's a controversial subject, isn't it? In my view, it was always going to happen. If you take a particular source of income away from a landlord, there's going to be a way that they get that back. And it was pretty obvious it was going to be then rents were going to increase, so the tenants are actually still paying that amount more. They're just paying it per month. Pete, I know you have a slightly different take.
Yeah, well, I think. Look, it's all a case of doing it fairly because I know for a fact that back, when tenants were charged for fees for referencing, we kind of charged a set price, and the set price that we charged for tenants at the time is the exact price that we charge for landlords now. So, from my point of view, there hasn't been any increase or spike. But what used to shock me the most was I've been talking to tenants, because we deal with a lot of international students, and they like to come in and get properties for a whole year and be comfortable where they're living, and they like to live together a lot of the times. I was hearing horror stories how they were having to pay £450 and in excess of just to put in an application.
And that's not before you've got the deposit or the rent.
No, well, that's it. That's before you go down the deposit and rent rate. So paying £450 just to kind of say, yes, I'm interested in the property. And there was never any safeguard for the tenant as far as You know, what happens if a landlord says no? What happens if you fail for referencing? And I think there are a lot of people abusing that. And I think on the same time, there's a lot of private landlords who also kind of see that as an excuse to put the rent up exponentially. So instead of what you would consider to be, you know, like you said, a fair £10 per head option to cover the cost over a 12-month period, if they're paying that sort of money, we're seeing the rents instantly jump up by 50 quid a month. As soon as that happens, that sets a precedent, and the rest of the market, it's inadvertently put the market up, not only because of that, but other landlords are looking at it going, hang up, my house is comparable, it's similar. You've got £700 for that. I want £700 for mine, when historically they would have got 575. So it's tough conditions to be in the rental market at the moment. But
changing, Pete? Sorry, do you think that it could come back in tenancy fees, or is that?
No, absolutely not. I think that the tenancy fee ban it's been one step towards accountability in the private rented sector, and I think it's one thing that is going to be putting a lot of assurity and a lot of confidence in tenants to actually deal with professional letting agents and managing agents. Now, there's no need to charge tenants for fees whatsoever. At the end of the day, the rules and guidelines are set there to actually protect everybody concerned, not only tenants but landlords as well. Well, this is something that we've got to remember. You can cap your holding payment level the same way the tenant fee ban dictates that you have to cap your deposit level as well to 5 weeks. So these are all guidelines that are actually put in place. But what we've got to remember is, as letting agents or landlords or managers, just follow the rules. There's no right or wrong. It's not a case of opinion. It's all just down to following the rules and just sticking to a set of guidelines, and everybody knows what they are. And that's the good thing. It's regulated.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, I mean, we're going to touch on it later, but it's another reason for potentially to look at using a managing agent, isn't it? And certainly, we're starting on regulations and things here. Before we get on to legislation and all that good stuff, let's have a look at rent levels at the minute. So the UK regional breakdown, this is from May, the Home Rental Index from May this year. So monthly average rents in the UK at a new record high of £997 per calendar month. Before we all jump on board and have a crack, we all know that London sometimes skews those figures. Taking London out of the equation, it's still £854 per calendar month. Makes me think twice about potentially moving out of my flat at £550.
Your neighbours will be pleased.
Yeah, that's it. Just hope your landlord's not on the webinar tonight, Jason.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me though, a lot of those figures and that. I mean, Greater London, it's dropped by 0.9%, whereas all the others have gone up. I mean, I think there's been a big shift, hasn't there? Years ago, it was very much like you had to be in London to have the big job and the big smoke. That's really changed. Places like Manchester, Birmingham, where there's big industries now coming into there, people can rent there, can't they, and live in, they can commute. HS2 link, if that comes into play, it looks like it will. It'll just pull these apart even more, won't it? People can commute from further afield. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And again, especially from the investment side, that we've saw in certain areas of this before.
There's certainly a lot of people moving out of the Greater London locations coming into Greater Manchester. And I've got some interesting stats and figures and kind of information on that, a little bit later on, but it just paints part of a bigger picture. The wealth of the property, the UK property market is being spread around, and it's not just staying in one region anymore. And it's really exciting to see happen in your home cities.
Yeah, and in general, it's high. Capital's asked what size accommodation, and this is across the board, isn't it? It's
an average, yeah.
So this does include, your smaller rooms, your en-suites, which are obviously going to be a lot cheaper than your larger ones. So it shows how strong it is. I mean, that is
£854
yeah,
a month.
Yeah. But in general, the UK market is solid, isn't it? We're a small island with a growing population, and that is always going to force rents up. So.
Capital, just to touch on your question there, we will come on to, certainly when we're talking about Chester, we can show you a little bit more in terms of actual figures to property type later on. So we'll get on to that. But at the minute, we're just talking broad terms across the whole of the UK. One interesting thing I found was the household rent to income ratio currently, and certainly by region, but the average UK average household rent to income ratio currently stands at 30.5 average for the UK. Northwest sitting at 29.2, and without much surprise, London out on its own at 35.5. Seems a lot. That seems very high. But that's where they are. That's where the figures are at. There's a lot of money being spent on rent at the minute.
Yeah, again, it could be something to do with COVID potentially. What do you think, Pete? Is your initial reaction like that?
Yeah, I think that the ratios the ratios are high, but what you've got to think about in the time period that it's been reported in, we've already kind of said that a lot of people are opting to kind of have changes in the sizes of their accommodation. Now, if you look at, say, the HMO market, which these figures will include, it's not just going to be the single let market, it's going to be the HMO market as well. If you bear it in mind that if you have a low skilled job and and you're kind of on what is considered minimum wage, quite a lot of the time, say, you can rent a room that's £120 a week. That's $520 per calendar month. A rent to income ratio would mean that you need to be earning £16,000. Well, for £16,000 with your basic salary, which is £17,500, means that a third of your rent, a third of your wages are pretty much going out in rent and bills straight away. So it's high figures. I'd like to see them a lot lower, but this all points towards strength in the UK property market in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, just want to go. Let's go a little bit off on legislation because I know we've got a lot to get through. So, I just want to start with the EICR and electrical certificates. So in January 2020, government announced the introduction of mandatory electrical safety inspections for private landlords. It's something that's been discussed for a while, and it's hardly surprising that it's been brought in. Scotland's had a similar legislation for over 5 years now. The electrical safety standards in the private rental sector regulations 2020 were officially brought in on the 1st of April 2020. From July last year, all new tenancies required an EICR. As of the 1st of April this year, the requirement applies to all tenancies. That's new and existing. So a bit like the gas safety, all private landlords in England are required to provide an electrical safety certificate. It's obviously got to be done by somebody who's registered. Yeah. And then a copy's got to be provided to the tenant, and it has to be done every 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a pain, kind of all this legislation changes, but in general, it's a good thing, isn't it? Any rules that come in where it's going to make landlords improve the properties and make it safe for tenants, we can't really look down. There's obviously been disasters over the last few years of it, so.
I was a little bit surprised. Peter and I have spoken about this. I was a bit surprised. Obviously, pat testing isn't mandatory as such.
I think pat testing. If you've got, if you're dealing with the sort of market, Jason, where you've got kind of HMOs that are either mandatorily or selectively licensed, then a condition of that would be after the first year, if you get a year's grace on new appliances, but you should be providing pat certificates, so portable appliance tests. Now, the EICR and the way that works with the pat certificates are, if you've got a standalone fridge freezer, that will need one. You've got a standalone kettle, that'll need one. Standalone microwave, anything that is considered non-integrated. So if you get an electrician go to one of your lovely new apartments in Chester, and they have a look around and we're like, yeah, brilliant, no doubt you'll have a lot of integrated appliances, which will all be covered under the EICR and not actually under the pat test. So although it's not a legal requirement to have it done on an annual basis, it's always seen as an advisory. But I think this EICR is another firm step towards accountability in the private rental sector, and any rental sector comes to matter.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And it's another reason why to have a management company as well. Probably certain landlords panicking looking at this maybe that they weren't aware of it, but it's first and foremost, Pete, isn't it? It comes to the management company that have got to make sure that's in place.
Look, absolutely. A managing agent is the first line of defence with the council, and undoubtedly anything that goes wrong in a rented property and there's a managing agent involved, the first port of call will be from the council to the managing agent. So you need your managing agent to basically work for you extremely hard to make sure that they protect you. Now, no one landlord can actually have the experience and knowledge to kind of do 20 people's jobs. You pay a managing agent to look after your best interests, don't you? Make sure things are done properly. And this is just one thing of many that goes into the pot that actually makes the UK housing market a lot safer for the private rented sector.
Yeah, Capital's asked, does this apply to furnished holiday lets? On this short-term lets, it would still apply to that, I presume.
Yeah. I think the general rule is any property, any accommodation that you have that is rented, i.e., resided in either long-term or short-term by somebody who's not yourself, even if it's a family member, and there's some sort of agreement involved, whether it be a special tenancy, a short-term tenancy, and a short tenancy, should have a certificate in place. Now, I know that when it comes to, a lot of the holiday lets have always been a hot topic of conversation because you get high yielding returns, and they don't always, or they haven't traditionally followed the same line of legislation. But there will come a point very, very shortly when they will, and this is the first step towards that. So if you have any property at all that you rent out that isn't your main place of residence and you rent it out to somebody else, get it done. Protect yourself, cover yourself, and cover the safety and health of your visitors within that dwelling.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it wasn't legislation, I would have thought it'd be, you should do that anyway, like you said, just to cover yourself. Anybody wanting any further information on that, you'll see Megan's put in the link to the government guidance there on the electrical safety standards. Click on the link or copy it and it will take you straight there and you can have a read through on that. Pets, a little bit more lighthearted. So I don't know who's keeping frogs in there. Should tenants be allowed to keep pets in rental properties? So just before we get into this, the other day, Conservative and Labour peers spoke in the House of Lords debate, mostly in favour of allowing pets to be kept by private tenants. Although the government spokesman in the Upper House, Lord Greenhoff, I think I went for that right. Said the issue was all.
I'm just still shocked that Labour and Conservative agreed on something.
Although they said the issue was ultimately up to individual landlords, most of the peers suggested their wish to see the model tenancy agreement more widely used. The latest version of this model tenancy agreement calls for pets to be allowed. It's an interesting debate with valid opinions on both sides. Allowing pets can make properties more desirable. It can encourage tenants to stay longer. Obviously, again, I'm going to bring up COVID here. It helps to tackle mental health, loneliness, things like that. But policymakers must understand the effect of the government's decision to cap tenancy deposits under the Tenants' Fees Act. Even the best behaved pets can have an impact on a property. Therefore, landlords and letting agents need to be able to safeguard against damage. Just before we get into it, Lord Flight, who in the past has spoken up for landlords in debates about the private rental sector, said it might be worthwhile requiring insurance policies to be taken out by tenants wanting pets. Seems a sensible suggestion to me.
I for one, if I can just kind of start on this is a little bit of to and fro. I, for one, absolutely love the idea of kind of being able to have a rented property where you can reside with your pets. Because for a lot of people, especially over the course of the pandemic, they've been at home working from home and their cat and their dog is if they worked before, has become their best mate, really. You spend a lot of time with your animals, and I kind of think that it does make for a nicer living situation. It's not always applicable. It's not always possible to do it. And I know, Mike, when we were speaking earlier on, you have kind of slightly different views towards it yourself, which is completely understandable because this is all circumstantial. We can't really expect, if you've got a shared house or HMO, for somebody to bring animals into that situation, because you have to bear in mind anxiety, you have to bear in mind allergies and certain things like that. We do have several tenants who actually have basically emotional support animals. So I think it's all on it's got to be on an individual basis. Now, from a landlord perspective yourself, Mike, you've got a slightly different take on that, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from on it. I just think should still be the choice of the landlord, in my opinion, as to what to do with it. I've got buy-to-let property, and I allow the tenants to have a small pet. I'd probably say the smaller dog of that picture than the bigger one. So the management company that I use, as I said, they will vet that and make sure That's right. And so, yeah, I just think it should be still the landlord's opinion. It's their property on it. They still want it looked after. And for other tenants in it, if it's a block of flats, for instance, Pete, I mean, what if there's a dog barking, and they can't do that? There's a lot of...
You have to... You've also got to kind of bear in mind, but you're right, with a block of flats, it might be against the terms of the lease to actually bring animals into the apartment blocks. And that's something else that you've got to consider. But, especially in a flat, although they're soundproofed well enough, the cry of a dog or cat that's missing their owner for hours and then during the daytime wouldn't please the neighbours, would it?
But it's a big opportunity as well for landlords to allow pets, because there's still a lot that don't. So if you open that up, you're opening up a big market. We've got a property, haven't we, Eden Grove, where it's a furnished holiday let, and it's big for your walkers bringing their pets with them, and you open it up and allow it, it's going to help rental figures on that and push it up. So, yeah, tough one. The debate could go on, I think, for a long time.
I think it just comes down to common sense, and again, who's managing the property and making sure it's being kept up to a certain standard. I know we've spoken about also inspections and things like that, Peter. So
yeah, look, absolutely. Any managing agent worth their salt would ensure that the properties receive interim inspections, especially if there's an animal involved, to make sure that the house isn't falling into a state of disrepair. However, what you've got to kind of imagine is that not all people, not all people for animals, not people, but no, not all animals are going to behave and act the same sort of way. And I think a lot of the time it's just down to stereotypes and perhaps a slight understanding or basically a misunderstanding of kind of what should be expected. I'm all for, don't get me wrong, I'm all for making sure that when you, as a tenant, leave the property, you have it fumigated and you have a professional deep clean done to mitigate any odours or any sort of or any possibility of fleas. And I think that's just more of a courtesy, more of a courteous element.
Would that not mean then there should be an increase on deposits to sort of cover that? Maybe we can meet halfway, Pete, on that and sort of allow it. It's in legislation, but the deposits have to increase.
Yeah, I think because so much time and effort was put into actually putting the tenancy fee ban together, although it was kind of introduced into the mainstream market June 2019, it was in consultation for 3 years. So it took 3 years in order for it to kind of pass through the House and then actually come through to legislation. So I think in the future you could see something happen. I'm not too sure if it would mean that there'll be an instant change on the cap of your 5-week deposit level. However, a lot of agents, if we've got investor landlords here, what you have to a lot of agents and a lot of landlords will only take one calendar month's rent anyway, which is 4.33 weeks. So you can quite happily just say, look, I want the 5-week deposit, and you're not doing anything wrong. It does give you a little bit of a safety net and a little bit of peace of mind and assurance there.
But Carol makes a good point there that not necessarily the deposit would cover the full replacement. I think you're right on that, Carol.
Yeah, look, Carol, it is a great kind of call of that. And you're right, but I think with regular inspections in a property, with regular communication with the tenants regarding, well, I think at the beginning of the tenancy, if there are rules and guidelines that are set out, just like the tenant fee ban, and there's an expectation of what's expected of the tenant, what's expected of the landlord, in the understanding that they're going to allow it, I think that it's got to all have to be on an application basis. I think you're just going to have to take each case at a time. And Colin, I could just see you coming in there saying that you found it best to treat the house flat after they leave. So you ask for a £200 treatment to cover it. I think, if it's taken out the deposit with something that's pre-agreed before the end of the tenancy, I think that's something that is, discussed between you and your managing agent, or you and your tenant. But same thing again, it's the course of treatment that leaves you in a safer peace of mind.
Yeah, it's a debate that I think we could have all night, and
quite easily.
I think
we'll have to move on. I think.
Yeah, we've opened a can of worms. Hopefully not, we get charged for that as well, keeping them in your house. Anyway, Megan's actually very kindly put up the link to the transcript to that House of Lords debate. So anybody wanting to have a read through what they discussed in the House of Lords regarding pets, feel free to click on the link, and that will take you straight there. moving on, I mean, you know, yeah, I think we should move on from this because we will go on all night if it's still pets. Housing benefit. Just wanted to put this stat up there. You know, we've got the number of claimants on different kinds of benefits throughout the UK. Currently, there's 3.7 million people claiming housing benefit. It's unlawful for agents and landlords to advertise no DSS or housing benefit. But you know, there's still some landlords out there, especially the private sector, who don't allow housing benefit, or there's a stigma about housing benefit. I haven't dealt with lettings for about the past 5 years, but I spent 15 years in the lettings management sector, and I've got to say, over that time, most or some of the best tenants I ever came across were housing benefit, and some of the worst tenants, or a lot of the worst tenants I ever came across, were actually, on paper, they looked great. They were in the professional sector. On paper, they looked amazing, but in reality, turned out not to be so great. So
you've just got to be careful not to stereotype, haven't you, on this type of thing? I know, Pete, you've worked a lot, haven't you, in the housing benefit side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, being an agent who's based in a city that's been hit very, very hard by a pandemic. You know, and if you bear in mind, you know, Manchester is a retail and hospitality kind of haven, and we've seen it quite a lot with a lot of our tenants. Now, the thing that I'll always come back to on this sort of subject or topic is, show me a list where all of the private rented sector tenants are on this list. There isn't one, but there's a list of all the tenants and applicants who are actually in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit to go towards for housing. And I think that point alone makes it a lot hard. I think that point alone almost gives a slight bit of reassurance to landlords and agents, because if that person destroys your house and messes the house, first of all, you've got a guarantor. Never go into it without a guarantor in place. Make sure the guarantor has got a good income, clean credit, and nothing adverse against them. And then if a tenant does leave a property with severe rent arrears or damages, you can report them to the council. That'll put a massive black mark against the name. And the next time they try to apply for a property elsewhere, it will be a massive lead door. They won't be able to get through. So everybody's been affected by it. You know, I've got clients of mine who have been working in a warehouse. You know, I've got clients who are pilots who have all been in a situation where they've had to kind of slightly change their income status or lifestyle. But the figures make for very interesting reading when you have a look at how many people are on job seekers allowance, and then how many people are claiming housing benefits. I would expect the swing to be a lot bigger, but it isn't.
Yeah, you're right. And you mentioned obviously people getting affected. We discussed earlier, you know, breakups. So you've got single mums there suddenly found themselves, you know, on their own with a child. Can't work because of obviously, you know, having to look after the children. There's people in so many different scenarios. And I think as a landlord, you've got to be open to that.
Yeah, you do. And as like Pete says, as long as you've got the guarantor behind it, you can have a bad tenant who's on housing benefits or a bad tenant who isn't. You know, that's going to happen. Just protection either way. One
of the worst tenants I ever had was he was a self-employed lawyer, £100,000. He had and he had references to back that up. Turned into rent arrears and trashed the house. So, you know, just because somebody's good on paper doesn't make them a decent person.
What about someone playing loud music every Friday night?
Let's move on. Peter, it's your time to shine. You know, we're going to pass you over now into Peter's capable hands to talk a little bit more in depth about what's going on in Manchester. Yeah, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, guys. So look, Manchester is a market. I've been in here 14 years, and I've seen a heck of a lot of changes. Now, there's one thing that's become clear to me throughout that whole period of time, and it's the fact that it's always proven itself to be a formidable force. Now, Manchester, Greater Manchester combined, it attracts thousands of new residents year on year. But you've got to kind of look at why. Is it affordable housing, competitive salaries, low cost of living, which we had a look at earlier on? Or maybe it's just a desire to get out of the busy city environment and escape the rat race. Now, we spoke very briefly and touched base on the fact that London prices are going down a little bit, things are dipping, rental prices are going down because there's probably more of an over-demand, an oversupply, because a lot of people are actually leaving the big smoke of Greater London and moving into the Greater Manchester region. So I nerd up every now and then, and I have a look at the ONS, or the Office for National Statistics. Great kind of source of data and information, especially when it comes to getting good, powerful messages across. Now, in 2019, haven't seen the updated for 2020 yet, but 16,500 people, now this is in accordance to the electoral register, actually sacked off London and Greater London to move up here to Manchester or Greater Manchester region. Now, that's just one city in the UK that are actually losing residents to come and live here, which is fantastic news for our property industry. It's absolutely brilliant. They're going to need places to live. Developers are still making houses, but we've still got a major problem in the city, which I hope will be sorted out very soon. Now, the problem is, and I'm not too sure how you guys are finding it in Chester, but we've got a problem here in Manchester where we've got unprecedented demands for new housing, government-funded housing, rehousing, co-living and short-term accommodation. And we've got such a high resident base here in Manchester, Greater Manchester region. Guys, any idea roughly how many people do you think live in Greater Manchester?
That's 1.5 million.
Say more, 2.5.
Right. Mike, you're close. You almost get the cigar. 2.84 million residents as per the ONS figures from 2020. Now, that only increases further and further. If you look at the trends over the last kind of 10, 15 years, on average, the city gains 110,000 new people. And that's on top of the 63,000 students that Manchester and Salford University enroll every single year academically. So it is an amazing city. There's a lot going on. Now, having a look at those sort of figures there with the students, but there's a bit of a bleak picture. I'm not too sure what your figures are like in Chester. Would you know how many properties are vacant in Chester at the moment?
I think we have that later on.
We have
that later on, right? Okay, well, fine. We'll have that for later. But look, if you jump on Rightmove now, anybody, even if they want to do it from home, look at Manchester City Centre and look within a mile of Manchester City Centre.
Yeah.
I did it a couple of days ago. 2,553 properties available to rent. Now, in any sort of normal market, these will be snapped up by international students, and you wouldn't have that amount of that volume of properties on the actual open market because they would have been gone. Which is quite interesting because now I'm thinking we talk a lot about kind of a lot of people that go into universal credit and a lot of people that go onto housing benefits and need a bit of help and assistance in the housing sector. You have a government that's got a pot and a fund to actually help these guys out, and you've got an influx of empty properties. It just seems a little bit silly to not look or consider the option of having these universal credit and housing benefit applicants, as long as they meet the criteria, they can afford the rent from the payments from the council, they have a guarantor, actually kind of residing in some of these properties. Because at the end of the day, the whole point of being a landlord and an investor is such that you purchase your property, you put your capital into it, you want to see a return. All the time it's sat there empty, you're not getting any sort of return. Now, certainly in Manchester, as things are starting to look busier, shouldn't be too much of a worry for too long. However, what we are seeing are a lot of people downsizing, not only in property size, but price as well. And this is slow. This has brought the prices down across the market over the last year and a half. It's getting back to where it should be, though. I think you guys in Chester have probably seen exactly the same thing with prices dipping and fluctuating and demands going up and down. How have you found it?
Yeah, it's been strong, hasn't it? The rental side. I mean, we obviously, as you know, we specialise as well in the short-term let side, furnished holiday lets, which has been positive even through COVID. It's been really good. We've got loads of figures on that as well. Areas like Manchester, when we in our short-term let side struggled a little bit more into the major cities. Whereas places like Chester was really strong during that time. Manchester's now coming right back up. Places like Trafford is doing really well on normal rentals and on short-term lets as well. Where a few years ago you maybe would never have thought that. Salford Quays, 10 years ago you probably never thought what it's achieving now. But with the Media City moving there was a big move. So
yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. You're right 100%. When you look at any sort of city and any sort of major city that's still growing, and primarily, Manchester and Salford are still going. When the BBC rocks up and the ITV come along, and then you get Media City, then you get the brand new developments that are taking place all around the quays, and you get developers putting up tower blocks that, you know, the kind of overlook Beetham Tower at the bottom of Deansgate. They're not doing it for the fun of it. You know, there's an actual proper demand there, and the demand is such that you know, we get properties on the market at the moment, single let properties, and we list them on the Monday, and we're taking holding payments on the Tuesday afternoon. And it's a fascinating market to be on, because I haven't seen it be that vibrant for probably the last 5 or 6 years. But there's still a lot of properties to kind of get through. We find one thing that we find more and more though at the moment is, and you touched base on it earlier on. I'm not sure if it was Jason or you, Mike, who touched base on it earlier on. Whenever you live in a property, it's got to be right, hasn't it? Because that's your home, that's your entertaining area. It's where you sleep. It's where you work, and the garden's like your little bit of solitude, and it's quite nice. And what we experience massively here is when a lot of tenants in the market at the moment are actually got the better of a lot of letting agents and landlords, because they know that there's an oversupply of properties on the market. So if you get a tenant who rocks up who asks for a tumble dryer, or asks for a washing machine, or asks for something that isn't standardly in the property as it goes, or a rent-free period, strongly consider it, because if you say no, the very next person they go to will say yes straight away. And it's fascinating, you know, half an hour can be the difference between finding a tenant and not finding a tenant through no fault of your own.
Yeah, again, it just comes down to flexibility, or just being amenable to the people that are looking. I know, you know, we discussed it earlier and we touched on that point. And I overheard Alicia in our office talking to a landlord who's got, I think it was 2 sisters wanting to rent, and I think they'd asked for a little bit more furniture. And you know, they'd ask for that, and you think, for the sake of keeping those tenants, whatever they want, just try and provide it. Yeah,
that's it. And I think I try and encourage all of my clients, encourage all of my clients to basically have a really open mind. I think when you go into an investment of any type, whether it be a holiday let, short-term let, or whether it be a family home to rent out, or an apartment somewhere, always have an exit strategy. Now, in your flexibility in having that exit strategy, you also kind of naturally develop the ability to be slightly more amenable to get deals done. So have a look, even if there's a small request being made, use it as a negotiating tool with your agent as well. Yes, I can provide a tumble dryer. However, can I have an increase in £10 a month rent? It's something that means that your rent goes up to the tenant. However, and that will report in the rental figures that are going up, and that could be something that's, you know, played a massive part in it. But sometimes it's better to facilitate the tenant to get the deal done, as long as you know that you've got a sure thing at the end of it. Now, HMOs are slightly different, because we rely very strongly on a lot of students to fill the HMOs, guys. Mm-hmm. And when you get a lot of students who actually go back home to the hotel of mum and dad during the pandemic, or they simply aren't allowed into the country due to the COVID restrictions, and there's that C word again, it does mean that there are a lot of properties on the market that would normally be filled by now, and they're not. Now, come tomorrow at 5 o'clock, anybody who's in student accommodation somewhere will have the stewards of that accommodation locking up the door and probably changing the locks, and you've got to get all your stuff out and be in new student accommodation. So we're probably just entering into our busiest period of the year, and we've still probably got 22% of our student stock available in the Salford, Burnley and Lancaster areas, which is slightly further north. We can talk about that another time. But the point that I'm trying to get across is, any sort of investment that you have, look for the flexibility and options to not put yourself down one sort of tunnel. Have a look at, can you make off suites in your HMO? Are you set on having students, or will you consider working professionals? Could you turn that property into a single let? And I think if you remain flexible with your approach of anything and do your due diligence, you can't really go wrong.
I think that touches on, we go back to Capel's question about building a portfolio and having a whole range of different types of property. And again, you've just touched on how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You need to have a decent exit strategy with it, and you need to be able to make it work for you as a landlord. And I think a lot of that, if you're stuck or if you're struggling or you don't quite understand the best way to do things, you've got a very powerful tool at your fingertips. If you have a managing agent, talk to them, ask them what their opinions are, see what ideas they have. They'll have 20 or 30 people that can give you an idea that you wouldn't have even considered. So I'm not going to paint too much of a kind of bleak picture about the Manchester property market and everything, because I know that we have a look at these stats about high unemployment and the amount of people kind of on benefits and looking to, on a property market that has struggled a little bit. But as far as I'm concerned, in the history books, write out 2020 and 2021 because they couldn't have happened. We're going to be getting back and bouncing back to normal where we should be. But I kind of think that it might take a year or so, year and a half so to do it. Just remain vigilant, be patient with it, and just understand that it will happen when it's meant to happen. I don't know if you guys have got anything else to add to that as my little sign-off note.
I don't think so. We'll move on to the we'll go more on to the Chester side as well.
Before we get on to that, I mean, talking about management, Peter, we were discussing, obviously, a managing agent, and in terms of people paying rent, etc., and rent arrears, this is a bit of figures on from your side, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, because arrears are one of the biggest things that have come. Arrears are always one of the biggest battles that a letting agent or landlord faces. And I think it's all about knowing how to manage them and deal with them properly. Now, we've actually got a dedicated team that look after our arrears. And when you have a look at these sort of stats and figures that are thrown up here, we've got what's recorded as 345 live tenancies. Now, if you bear in mind, I could have a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom HMO, and all the tenants will be on one licence, mainly to appease the council in their quest to not give every single room its own council tax bill. Mm-hmm. So tenants-wise, we probably look after about 600 tenants over those 345 live tenancies, which is a phenomenal amount of tenants to be looking after. Now, 12.5% of those are in what I would consider to be some sort of arrears. And when I say arrears, it could be a penny or it could be £100. If we're in arrears, we're in arrears. We treat it exactly the same way. It's a debt that needs paying. Of those, overall, only 3.5 to 12 cases, 3.5% are flirting with the 2-month rule, or the traditional 2-month rule. And only 2 of those, so 0.6% of the whole portfolio, are actually subject to a Section 8 notice for severe arrears. So it would take an individual a very long time to be able to fight these battles, but your managing agent will be able to know from day one how to go about getting the arrears down and getting the rent in and how to actually resolve things very quickly.
I think we've got ours as well, haven't we, on the Chester side?
Yeah, we have. 1% of our tenants that we manage are in rental arrears. It actually equates just under 1%. It's actually what we've got one tenant that's in arrears in total at the properties that we manage. Just to put that into a bit of context, and I know we're slightly moving away from Manchester with this, but as a city, Chester has 7,088 private rental properties. And out of those 7,000, or just over 7,000, 638 are in some sort of arrears, totaling about 1.5 million. 9% of the rental properties in Chester are 2 or more months in arrears, whereas ourselves, as a managing agent, we've got 1 property in arrears currently. So again, I suppose it comes down to, I don't want to. I suppose we are blowing a trumpet a little bit, but it's blowing the trumpet for managing agents, and looking after that and the payments.
Yeah, Colin just mentioned about Southampton. That's really impressive how quickly that can let, and that's a common story, isn't it, across a lot of places. Very similar to us in Chester when we put property live. It goes very quickly on that as well. And in terms of your question, Capital, in terms of other areas other than Manchester, it purely depends on what strategy you want to go down. A student property, for instance, might not work in the big cities. We tend to find it works well, don't we, in the secondary locations where there's perhaps not as much supply, but huge demand. So it really depends, Capital, on what your strategy is. But we'd be able to have a chat with you on that separately with one of the consultants as well.
I'm actually a firm believer, that the rental markets that are strong in the UK, you can actually buy anywhere as long as you get the right property. There'll always be a tenant for that property in most towns. It just depends on how you go about it, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, whenever you're kind of looking at buying a new city, what I'll generally say is it's very quick to kind of share the information with other people and say, I'm buying here because of the yields and the returns. And you always get a situation where you talk to an investor, find out where they're buying, when you speak to 10 more, and they're all buying at exactly the same place.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody's getting together, and instead of having their own little gold mine area, the information's being shared. Now, I like that about the property industry, but if you get onto a good thing, sometimes try and keep it a little bit close to your chest just so you can get more of them.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So Manchester's doing well. What about Chester? The sales and lettings market in Chester. We're going to briefly go through this a little bit. Chester's not as big as Manchester, and what you said about those available properties, Peter, that's a lot. In Chester, this was taken a week or so ago. There's currently 260 properties to rent in Chester today. Obviously, 46 of those were listed in the past 14 days. So it does show that in actual fact, things are starting to open up again. And again, we come back to the lack of availability, again, due to COVID and people not moving out.
And that average is high again, isn't it? £711 a month. Again, considering that's including your ensuite
definitely
room.
staying put.
Again, compared to yours. So that's including little small ensuite rooms as well. That's added to the average. So it's a strong rental that per month, isn't it, the average?
Yeah, well, if we look at Chester, there's currently available, there's 3 properties, if we look at rental figures, there's 3 properties under £250 a month. There's 131 properties between 250 and 500. There's 88 between 500 to 1,000, 27 above 1,000 to 2,000, and 11 above 2,000. So the majority is around the 250 to 500 pound mark. Available properties, but again, 260 isn't that many, really. I don't think. But yeah, again, it goes lack of availability and things. If we actually look at, Capel earlier, you mentioned about property types. We're just obviously looking at Chester here, but in Chester currently there's 115 rooms with an average of 569 per calendar month. So that's similar to your HMOs,
and
like that.
I don't think this again surprises us too much. I think people prefer the sort of apartments these days, don't they? From what we've seen, certainly in the Chester market, it might be different with you, Pete, in Manchester, but the HMO side, the smaller rooms, have been less popular again. To keep bringing it up, but COVID's had an effect on that. Whereas we've done a lot of short-term lets, haven't we, on the apartment front, or people want houses with the outdoor space as well. So that's why there's potentially not that much available that way. So does.
Any sort of
the ensuite rooms.
Any sort of privatised living is in the fact that it's more insular. Is slightly better, I think. And the interesting, sorry to just talk over it. I think the interesting thing is if you look at the price, you get a couple of mates who are both renting rooms at £570 a month. It's 1140 bills in. Go and get yourself a house. Bills on top. You have a lovely house. You have a little guest room where you have a study so you can work from home. You have a lovely garden, so then you can enjoy it. And those stats don't surprise me at all. I think if there were more single-let properties available in the Manchester market that were kind of more house-related, I think the stats would kind of have a good swing on them there as well.
Chester as well, to be fair, is more of a touristy place, I would say, than Manchester on that front. We do a lot of furnished holiday lets as well, don't we, in Chester, which is hugely popular as well. So that'll probably skew the figures a little bit on that front.
Yeah. Moving on, 1 in 5 landlords with mortgages have requested a mortgage holiday in 2020. 1 in 100 Chester landlords have been using their own personal savings to cover mortgage payments.
I guess if it's there, why not use it for a lot of people? I actually thought it might be higher, that figure, than the 1 in 5 when that rule came in with the COVID to request that holiday mortgage. But again, this is Chester. This is maybe different with you, Pete. Would you imagine the figures would be different in Manchester?
I think I think the figures probably won't change that much wherever you look across the country. But all I do know is But whilst the government have bent over backwards to be able to deliver such schemes as the furlough scheme to help people kind of keep their head above water, they've also offered the mortgage break for landlords. I'm very much surprised that 1 in 100 are kind of using their personal savings when there's a perfectly good scheme available that could be used. I know there's hoops to jump through, but we've certainly seen it with a couple of our landlords, unfortunately, and it's a shame. But it's great that there's the support out there to actually do it.
Yeah, and I mean, you're putting money though into your own property, aren't you? It's another reason to invest in property. You're using your own savings, but it's going into your own asset, which is why a lot of people buy to let property essentially. As opposed to putting money, I suppose, in other slightly riskier potential areas like stocks and shares. This is why property is so solid on that front.
Yeah. One thing, I mean, we got it banded down that well, obviously the government made it very hard or virtually impossible to evict tenants and ban on evictions, etc. That it's started to ease now, obviously. And I did see banded around that some have predicted, obviously, with the ease of evictions or people then, make it easier to evict a tenant, that we're then going to get a wave of homelessness. But just wanted to highlight that an untold story of landlords out there. Landlords are sometimes seen as the evil, I don't know, the evil people. Certainly ones who don't allow pets. But anyway, however,
small.
But in fact, I think evictions should always be seen as a last resort. And certainly in Chester, I think we've seen a lot of our landlords actually work with tenants, certainly with ones in arrears and because of COVID and actually helping them out and saying, I've seen a lot of conversations with some landlords where, they appreciate that their tenant might be in a little bit of difficulty currently, and that they're of the opinion some money's better than no money, and they don't want to just kick them out for the sake of then having to try and find another tenant where they know that tenant's been in there for some years and they're just going through difficulty.
And you'd hope that would build up the respect, wouldn't you, from the tenant to the landlord. They might look after the property a little bit more, hopefully when things are easing as well, that increases. So, there has been a lot of that. We've seen a lot of that with our landlords.
Yeah. Do you get that in there, Peter? That a landlord's fairly amenable to sort of a little bit of leeway?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We are. I think we're in a position, to be honest with you, where a lot of the landlords are extremely flexible. They know exactly kind of what they're doing, especially the seasoned landlords and investors who understand that this is just a blip. And I think anybody who invests any money anywhere as a professional landlord should understand that it's peaks and troughs. Anything that you can do to work alongside your tenant in order to basically keep everything running on track, it will actually help them put a lot of confidence in you as a landlord. And I think, do you know what? Extremely helpful. If you have an agent who uses, if you have an agent who does it for you, then look, utilize their skills in making sure that everything runs smoothly. So look, we're seeing it across the board. But it's good that people can talk and work together. I think the biggest thing is talking. You've got to be able to discuss these things openly.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, well, I know we're sort of getting on in time. Just staying on Chester, just wanted to touch on a couple of rental areas, very popular in the Chester area. Hull being the first one. I live in Hull myself. That's where I live. I love it. I moved there because of the area. It's a nice suburb. There's everything you need. You don't need to go into Chester city centre. Certainly when I looked in Hull, and this is about 3-4 years ago, there was only 2 properties available. And the first one I went for, I booked a viewing, and the property let within before I even managed to go to the viewing. It's still as popular.
It is, and you've got the train station as well, just a short walk away. And you're supposed to Hambridge, where you're more central Chester, aren't you, Hambridge? But a real picturesque place, Hambridge, lovely place to live as well on that front.
Yeah, 20 minutes in from Hull, about 10 minutes in from Hambridge, and then Sealand, another very popular area. Popular, not so much, I suppose, because of, more for the location.
Commutable, isn't it? You've got Liverpool easy on your doorstep, that front, Manchester as well, so that's where we see Sealand a bit more popular on that front.
Yeah, so I suppose similar in the areas to you've got your areas in Manchester, like we've already touched on, Trafford, etc. So, and you're going to maximise the rents in those areas. But again, property prices in those areas, maybe not Sealand as much, but Hull and Hambridge certainly.
Yeah, I think it just shows it doesn't have to be really central to get good rents, and these areas cover that, don't they? So we're still doing really well. It's the same with Manchester. We touched on it, like you say, with Salford Quay. They're still really strong.
And they're not city centre at all.
Exactly, which shows out the strength of the rental market. Okay.
Yeah. So just going on to low eco homes, and I know we had a quick chat about this earlier. The government's planning to force banks and building societies to penalise people wanting to mortgage drafty low eco homes that have got an energy certificate rating of D or lower. For those properties not hitting the correct level of EPC rating, it's suggesting some sort of levy will be placed on the mortgage provider, who in turn will pass that on to the home buyers in the form of higher mortgage payments. Some are describing the charges as an eco mortgage levy. Certainly, I mean, if we just quickly move on to this, certainly in the Chester area, just under 6 in 10 homes in Cheshire West and Chester, 58.9% of homes will be hit by this eco mortgage levy, thus potentially reducing the value of those homes. Interesting when you compare this with the national average of 60.6. In real numbers in Cheshire, that's just under 70,000 homeowners and landlords who would either struggle to get a mortgage or it would cost them more because they're a D rating on their EPC or below.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a way of improving properties, though. You can increase the ratings, can't you? It potentially forces developers on our side when we're selling it off plan to make them reach those rates. So,
well, I know a lot of developers that we deal with are actually quite into that, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, most new build properties will be above that anyway, so it's not really going to affect that front. But even on the existing ones, it forces them to improve it, landlords, to be able to sell it on to someone else who needs a mortgage for it. So, yeah, I don't think it's a particularly bad thing.
It's certainly a positive step towards raising the standards, and I think that the days of hearing horror stories about tenants that have windows that are timber framed, that are cracked, and with wind coming through and water coming through, and kind of walls that aren't properly insulated, and lofts that howl, and boilers that don't work are done and absolutely gone. Now, if you think about the 70,000 houses in and around Cheshire, that's going to keep the tradesmen rather busy, is it not? It's all there to prop up and boost the economy, so everybody will benefit, no doubt.
We've got a knock-on effect there, and I suppose that's something you've highlighted. That it's going to help with the unemployment. Your freelance tradesmen or whatever, they can help with that. So I suppose in a way it's all good if you look at it like that.
Glass half full.
Exactly. We're coming. We're starting to wind up now. Just wanted to, I suppose, we've harped on a little bit about agencies and what both UK rooms for rent and residential estates can do.
And this isn't about just selling ourselves or Pete. There's a lot of agents that do this. This is more about why use a management company in particular than try and do it yourself. Companies like ourselves have access to these portals on the market, Zoopla, Rightmove, on it, which means ultimately we can let properties quickly, which is the most important thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can list properties privately on the likes of Gumtree, but it may take you a 1 month, 2 months longer. If we go back to the average rentals of £700, £800 a month, that's a lot of money you're missing out on. So don't always try and put corners. That's someone who can be quite tight and do that. It's the wrong thing to do. It's worth spending that little bit extra on it.
Believe me, he's tight as well. I've been trying to get a beer out of him for years. Well, according to government and industry data, it suggests that a tenant who rents a property directly through a landlord and not an agent is actually between 2 and 3 times more likely to go into arrears of 2 months or more. I know certainly, and we chatted about this earlier. When I first started in lettings, we're talking 20 years ago. We used to use the lineage ads, the private landlords ads in the newspapers, and we used to get a lot more interest and phone calls from those ads than putting a page ad in. Times have changed dramatically, and whenever I've rented a property, I've never gone to a private landlord. I've always wanted, I suppose, the security of using an agent, or I've looked on Rightmove.
But it's keeping it hands off as well, isn't it? From our investors that we sell to, they don't want to be involved in all the day-to-day stuff, keeping on top of legislation and all that. You've got a life as well that you want to enjoy. So having that management company that can take care of that, and not too much of a cost, let's be honest, is really worth it. And those services that we mentioned there, again, just to point out, that's not just those other companies do that as well. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I've got quite a good little saying that I do like to kind of bounce around a little bit if I can, and it's such that if you had £100,000 sat in a bank, you wouldn't be rocking up to your bank every Monday and speaking to the bank manager saying, "Can I see my money?"
Yeah.
And that's it. At the end of the day, that's the exact logic. You give it to the right sort of people who are going to look after it and make it work for you, so you don't have to.
Yeah.
It's fantastic thing to invest in property, and to be honest with you, it's an industry that I'm very exceedingly proud to work with. And I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And back in my management days, I can remember being in the office on Christmas Day dealing with a tenant's boiler. And a private landlord, unfortunately, you've got to deal with that. We've just had the England game. You could get phone calls right in the middle of it. But it slightly leads. We've been talking about why use an agent, and the points we made. We've got a quick testimonial here from one of our landlords that we were managing his property through the lockdown. And I don't want to go through the whole lot. It's a long testimonial. I've just highlighted there a couple of points.
Yeah.
The first one being residential estates have secured a new tenancy within a very short period of time. Again, you mentioned time and how
speed is important. I think the speed there, the professionalism, keeping it hands off. They're the key points we've highlighted on it. And it's what landlords want. I'm sure you guys are the same about watching on it. So us and many other agents do provide that.
Yeah, absolutely. Predictions for the future, Peter.
I think England in the Euros.
Right. well, look. At the moment, predictions for Saturday, I can't tell you because Sweden and Ukraine are locked at 1-1 at the moment in the first half. So I can't give you any snippets at all towards the football. However, look, UK property market, especially kind of a local region where I am, I can speak confidently when I can say, look, I can see it bouncing back. We'll probably be a little way off being back to kind of what is considered normal once the restrictions have been lifted, and I could perhaps see it taking another 1.5 to 2 years in order for the markets to get back as strong as it was. Keep your options open, investors, landlords. Keep your options open. Keep plugging away at it, and make whatever you do work for you. Really. I'll get back to you later on a prediction on the football if I can muster up a good enough kind of outcome. All right.
I think for us as well. I mean, short-term lets. We've done several webinars on that of how popular it's been. We've done it for 12 years. That's very much the area we feel is going to go from strength to strength. So that's our solid prediction is now on that front. Something we're all invested in.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's watching and seen the staycation word banded around. It's been in the newspapers a lot, things like that. And not just staycations as in the furnished holiday lets, but you're quite right, the short-term market as well in the city centres and things. Big market there. That's set to continue. But in general, the lettings market has always been strong and will continue. I think we've got uncertain times still ahead. I think we've touched on landlords and letting agents need to just continue managing tenants that are experiencing problems. Just work with people though. But yeah, I see it all very, very positive. Certainly, I just want to touch on this. I just find it quite interesting. In March 2020, on the eve of the pandemic, a purchaser with a 10% deposit would have been £102 per month better off buying than renting. However, with the rents, or despite rents rising over the past 12 months, increases in loan-to-value mortgage rates have added to the cost of buying and owning a home. As a result, a typical first-time buyer will now find it cheaper to rent than buy. And although most financial experts are recommending that people obviously get themselves on the property ladder as soon as possible, personal suggestion is hold off for the time being.
Interesting little things to come up with, and I think quite interestingly, about 9 months ago, there were stats released by Rightmove supporting and suggesting the fact that after quite a bit of market research, anybody over the age of 25% of individuals over the age of 40 who haven't yet bought a property aren't likely to either. So we're seen as what's called generation rent, which yet again is great for landlords and investors.
It is. This is something that's been on the cards for a while, and I know that actually we're actually falling very much in line with much of Europe. A lot of European countries, it's actually seen more common to rent than buy, and I can see us actually following suit.
Yeah, but people, Michael also mentioned there about having money saved up during the sort of COVID area. We've seen that a lot, haven't we? And that's, I think, why prices have sort of rose as well, people getting into the market. But there's some great opportunities that come with that as well, isn't there? With the rental market so strong, it's going to be strong. It's a great time, Michael, to get into it. It's just getting into the right particular areas, which our consultant can talk to you about as well, depending on what your goals are, whether it's long-term income or a short-term thing. Depends on what type of investment to advise you down. But yeah, from myself, I bought during in this year, so I can't, and it's done well for me. I'm sure a lot of others have said.
Yeah, it's been a very buoyant market. I think one thing I would say, and it's not a case of just jumping in, but I think if you find the right investment that suits your needs, go for it.
Yeah.
Obviously, make sure you do all your due diligence and check it out. I'm not saying jump into anything, but things are coming and going that quickly.
There's never particularly a bad time to buy a property.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as you're not in a rush and you think, right, I need to sell it tomorrow. As long as you've got that comfort, there's never a bad time to buy it. Just buy property and wait, as they say, and you will do well on it. So,
and I think that might be a good little kind of answer explanation for Michael Knowles on the chat, who's asked, I'm probably one of hundreds of people with cash looking to get into property when furlough and other COVID-related matters come to an end. Is it sensible to wait, or is it time in the market that matters more? And I certainly think that it's all about not rushing to make a mistake.
Yeah. Don't jump.
Wait for the right opportunity, and if you're ready to go, then go with it. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think we've spoken enough. We've covered a lot in I'll say a short period of time. Fairly short. We're shorter than we have been before. Not too bad. Hopefully we haven't bored people too much. Been a bit of a lot of information. If there's anything we haven't answered, feel free to pop in any emails to us or anything like that. Firstly, Peter, absolutely fantastic, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. And for everybody that's still watching, Peter Baker, again, business development manager, UK Rooms for Rent. His contact details are there on the screen now, his web address, email address, etc. If you've got any questions for Peter, or his email address is there in the chat box. Megan's very kindly put that up. Again, Peter, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's been fun to chat. So,
guys, thank you very much for having me, and look forward to contributing on the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, so cheers, Pete. And for ourselves, if there's any investors out there that are looking to get into investment property, we've got consultants ready to speak to you. We'll talk you through what it is you're looking for to get out of it, and then we can advise accordingly. So, but no, really appreciate you joining us just after the football. Much appreciated.
Yeah, and so to me, so thank you. It's good night from me. And
I'm not going to do that.
You're not? Okay.
And it's a good night from him.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening, all, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. See you later.
Bye bye.